Hello there, my kittens. How are y'all doing? I am a little too loud. I'm going to back that off a little bit. What another day. It's nice to be back. It is a little bit frustrating, though, because my OBS stream crashed multiple times and I had to readjust the settings on the fly, but we got there. And that's what's important. So now that I'm in, why don't I have a sip of coffee at you and just let you sit in silence? All right, so today I wanted to do a marathon. Here's the plan, and then we're going to get going. I want to finish this book, Data Feminism, as soon as possible. It's been hanging out there for a while, and obviously I had a good reason for stopping. I mean, I did have an entire election study to organize and then put into the field and then data collect on, and then we're just still doing data collection now, even though the election was July 4th, because it takes a long time to follow up with people. But now that I am back and things are winding down, I wanted to get going on finishing this. So here's the plan, and then we're going to get going, because nobody likes to just, start a show and hear someone talk for 5 minutes about the subject that's not actually the content of the video. I'm going to listen to a chapter. At the end of it, I'm going to immediately schedule the next live stream with a little break for myself, obviously. It might be 5 minutes, it might be 20 minutes, depending on how I'm feeling at the time. And then I'm going to jump back in and do chapter 5. And then if possible, I'm going to go ahead and listen to chapter 5 and do the same thing at the end of chapter 5, set up another live stream. Let's plow through this and see how much we can get done. All right, that's the plan. So just a little bit of a preference. You've probably watched the rest of the series, because why would you be here in chapter 4 if you hadn't watched the first 3 chapters? But I have a love-hate relationship with this book. I love the idea of it. I love some of the content that they're presenting. I love the motivation, and I love the aims of the authors, but I just feel like a lot of times the delivery lets the general book down. Mostly because I'm very traditional in the way that I approach a piece of educational writing. I'm very much a tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Identify the key learning outcomes at the top so people know what's important and what's just sort of context on the side. I think stories are good and interesting and like they illustrate larger points, but I don't think stories in and of themselves are sufficient to convince people or as a means of getting ideas across, because different people take different things away from stories. And as an author, I think you have a duty to identify those things that you think are important and need to be taken out and taken away from a piece of writing. So with all those biases in mind, let's get going. Boop, boop, boop. And yeah, we're actually going. Okay, I just want to make sure we were going before I started this. I didn't want to be streaming for 15 minutes before I realized that we weren't actually going to start the chapter. So I'll check on my phone too, but yeah, let's go.
Chapter 4. Unicorns, Janitors, Ninjas, Wizards, and Rock Stars. In spring 2017, Bloomberg News ran an article with the provocative title, "America's Rich Get Richer, and the Poor Get Replaced by Robots." Using census data, the authors report that income inequality is widening across the nation. San Francisco is leading the pack, with an income gap of almost $500,000 between the richest and the poor.
Anyone else feeling that this is a kind of a weird audio? One thing I've definitely found with Speechify is that men's voices have higher quality than women's. Generally, women's come across as more robot-y and men's come across as more authentic. I think there's perhaps a chapter in there about AI voice quality, and non-white women's voices are even lower quality, especially when you start changing the speed. So we'll go with a traditionally male voice here and see if that's a higher quality. Let's go with the narrator. Let's have an old white guy talking about the importance of intersectional data collection and analysis.
Hey, hi, my name is Narrator. I speak in British English, in Francais, and in Español de España.
Okay, let's go with that.
Poorest 20% of residents. It has the lowest proportion of children for any major US city and a growing rate of evictions since 2003. While the San Francisco Rent Board collects data on these evictions, it does not track where people go, how many end up homeless, or which landlords and developers are systematically evicting major blocks of the city. This is where the anti-eviction mapping project stepped in, starting in 2013. Led by 2 women, Erin McElroy and Tara Graziani, The project is a self-described collective of housing justice activists, researchers, data nerds, artists and oral historians. They are mapping eviction, but they are doing so through a collaborative, multimodal, and yes, quite messy process. If you visit antievictionmap.com, there isn't one single eviction map. There are a total of 78 distinct maps linked from the homepage. Maps of displaced residents, of evictions, of tech buses, of property owners, of the Filipino diaspora, of the declining numbers of black residents in the city, and more. The group has a distinctly fluid, collaborative, and community-based way of working. Some projects originate from within the group. For example, the group is working on producing an atlas of the Bay Area called Counterpoints, Bay Area Data and Stories for Resisting Displacement, which has chapters on such topics as migration relocation, gentrification and the prison pipeline, indigenous and colonial histories, and speculation. But the majority of the projects happen in collaboration with non-profits, students, and community-based organizations. 469.
I was worried it was going to read that. All right, I'll take this as a moment. So that's quite a provocative, as long as I'm here, right? It's quite a provocative chapter title. Unicorns, Janitors, you would think that maybe we'd start off with the chapter name. But no, we just get thrown right into a story without any context. They do this a lot. And again, it's like, okay, this is interesting, but what am I meant to take away from this? What is the purpose of this story? All right, so starting over again, 4.
Example, the Eviction Defence Collaborative is a non-profit that represents people who have been evicted in housing court. While the city does not collect data on the race or income of evictees, EDC does collect those demographics, and they work with 90% of evicted tenants in the city. In 2014, they approached AMP to help produce their annual Report 1 and in return offered to share their demographic data with the organisation. Since then, the two groups have been working together on data sharing, annual reports and spatial analysis of evictions based on race. And the AMP has gone on to produce reports with tenants' rights organisations, timelines of gentrification with Indigenous students, oral histories with grants from anthropology departments, and murals with arts organisations. They all have the singular goal of documenting displacement and creative resistance from the standpoint of the residents and community members. Once you dive into the 78 maps, the charts and stories and voices multiply further. It's not a simple story. The anti-eviction mapping project's process and products would seem to be antithetical to the received wisdom in data science and visualization circles. Business writers tout the ability of data visualization to reduce complexity and create new insight, quickly and clearly. Nothing going on in the field of business intelligence today can bring us closer to fulfilling its promise of intelligence in the workplace than data visualization, wrote Stephen Few in an early 2007 white paper on the promise of data visualization. The story, told by prominent figures in the field such as Few and Nadia Bremer and David McCandless and Ben Schneiderman, goes something like this. We are living in the age of big data in which humans cannot process and make sense of the vast stores of information they are collecting. While our capacity for processing text and numbers is limited, our eyes are uniquely suited to detect patterns from a sea of visual information. As leading researcher Colin Ware has written, visualization provides an ability to comprehend huge amounts of data. The important information from more than 1 million measurements is immediately available. Thus, visualizing large data stores in sensible, user-friendly ways is our ticket to making sense, making decisions, and making money. This is not an untrue story. It really is measurably easier and faster to see patterns in a table of numbers if they are presented in graphic form. And some of AAMP's 78 maps perform this widely acknowledged function of data visualization by making patterns in the data visually apparent at a glance. For example, the tech bus stop eviction map, produced by the collective in 2014, plots the location of 3 years of Ellis Act evictions. This is a form of no-fault eviction in which landlords claim that they are going out of the rental business, in many cases to convert the building to a condominium and sell units at significant profit. San Francisco has seen almost 5,000 uses of the Ellis Act to evict residents since 1994. In this case, AMP plotted these evictions in relationship to the location of technology company bus stops.
I still don't know what I'm meant to be taking away from this. I am getting flooded with information, detailed information about evictions, which is interesting, but it'd be more interesting if I knew the larger point in which this fit in. And right now, I am just getting a story. Okay, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, and we're 2 pages in.
Starting in the
Pause. Oh, okay, we get some. Okay, that's okay. Visualization. Yep. Okay. I mean, I don't know how to interpret this. I guess maybe if I knew the city a bit more, I would recognize these locations. But as someone who doesn't live here, this illustration doesn't necessarily help me, other than as an example of how to do data visualization. I'm just going to put that out there.
2000s, tech companies with campuses in Silicon Valley began offering private luxury buses as a perk to attract employees who wanted to live in downtown San Francisco. Colloquially known as the Google buses.
Oh, I should say that for other reasons, I've taken off paragraph writing, so it just says, but didn't want the hassle of commuting.
These vehicles used public bus stops, illegally at first, to shuttle their riders in comfort. The location of the bus stops also meant that there was a new, wealthy clientele for condos in the area, and so property values around the bus stops soared. Here the AMP makes the case that so too did evictions of long-standing residents. Their analysis, shown in the image above, demonstrates that 69% of no-fault evictions between 2011 to 13 occurred within 4 blocks of a tech bus stop.
And if this was the point, I feel like we could have just started with this. But is the point how these people were displaced because of the corporate decisions on how to advertise or how to set up their transportation for their workers? Or is there a larger, I don't know what the point is. If I was interested in gentrification and housing, this would be a great case study. But that's not the name of the chapter. So what is this? Is the whole point of this is that data visualization can do a good job of making stories that have to do with how people are displaced easier to understand? If not, if so, because I don't know yet what the purpose of the story is, could you have told me that 3 pages ago?
But other AAMP maps, like narratives of displacement and resistance, pictured above, do not have an efficient analytical function. All 5,000 evictions are represented as sized red bubbles, so the base map of San Francisco is barely visible.
Okay, so this is a bad map. I feel like we're getting lost in the details, which I've said a lot of times, but it's a consistent problem with this book.
On top of the sea of red bubbles, sky blue bubbles dot the locations where the AMP conducted audio and video interviews with displaced residents, activists, media makers, and local historians. Clicking on a sky blue bubble sets the story in motion. I was born and raised in San Francisco proudly, begins Phyllis Bowie, a resident facing eviction in her Midtown apartment. She goes on to tell the story of returning from serving in the Air Force and working like crazy for 2 years to build up her income record at her small business to be eligible for a 1-bedroom lease-to-own apartment in Midtown, a historically black neighborhood where she had grown up. In 2015, the city broke the master lease and took away the rent control on their building. Now, the tenants who moved.
Scroll, scroll, scroll.
There, on the promise of a future of property ownership, are facing skyrocketing rents that none of them can afford. Bowie is leading rent strikes and organising tenants, but their future is unclear. The point of this map is not for the eyes to efficiently detect a correlation between space and evictions. There are very few patterns to detect when the entire city is covered in big red eviction bubbles and abundant blue story dots.
Oh, okay, so is this chapter about how to efficiently deliver data visualization to make, like, again, I don't know. What am I supposed to be taking away from this? I am lost in detail. What are the main points? Help! Help!
Rather, the visual point is simple and exhortative. There are too many evictions. Behind each eviction is a person with a unique voice and a
Fair
story
enough.
like Bowie's.
But is that what
The
I'm meant to
narrative's
study
map would
or
appear to be
understand?
messy. It does not efficiently reveal how evictions data may be correlated with BART stops, income, Google bus stops, or any other potential dimensions of the data. Moreover, even finding the tech bus stop eviction map or narratives map is complex, given the sheer number of maps and visualizations on the AMP website. There is no master map that integrates all of the information that AMP has collected into a single interface.
It's so ironic that this person is complaining about the lack of coherence and structured information of these maps when their own chapter hasn't told me what the point of the chapter is yet. Why is it called unicorns, wizards, like ninjas and stuff? What rockstar? Why is it called that? What are we gonna look at? I know I keep making the same complaints, but that's because we're 4 pages in and I still don't know why I am learning so much detail about this particular data visualization. Was it really worth it? Okay, fair enough. It was really meant to illustrate the point, and it was a great case study because it had all these dimensions to it, but I don't know what those dimensions are.
So AMP's efforts would seem to fail at what proponents indicate is the basic value of data visualization, taming information overload, integrating large amounts of information and detecting visual patterns efficiently. But perhaps cleanliness, efficiency and control are not the only criteria by which to judge data visualization.
Is that the point of this chapter? To set us up with some criteria to judge data visualization? I'm grasping at straws here. But if so, we haven't been given a list of criteria to challenge or question or expand. Oh God, not a related story.
A related story that falls into the data science bin of received ideas that we might want to think about more is that data always needs to be tamed. It is messy and in need of cleaning. It is often said that 80% of data analysis is spent on the process of cleaning and preparing the data.
That's true, actually. That's very true. And I'm going to just say a lot of that has to do with normally data sets come very clean, but they come according to the setup that the study found most useful. And oftentimes as data, like, well, if it's raw data, obviously first it has to be cleaned and organized. But even if it is cleaned and organized and is published on a data archive, like the one I work at, then just because that structure is there, it doesn't mean that that's the most useful way for the data to be presented to a researcher. So for instance, a lot of studies do this thing where they code men as 1 and women as 2. Whereas I think it's, well, if you're doing a linear regression and then so I'm just going to get nerdy for a second here. If you're doing a linear regression, you have what's called the A in the constant. And it's not that big of a deal, but if you set all of the numbers starting from 0, then your constant in the equation is the pure starting point. Like you don't have to have a constant plus 1 or a constant plus whatever the base number is in the like 1 to 4 scale or the 5 to 1 scale or whatever. You just get a consistent thing across all your variables, but that requires that you go through and look at the coding structure that was provided and then spend the time recoding 1 equals 0, 2 equals 1, and then rename the variable and relabel the variable and, like use that one. So once your data are clean, running the models is nothing because you clean the data already. All you need to do is plug them in and let the maths do their thing. But it's that thinking about how do I want my data prepared and how do I want them, a lot of places will do 1 equals strongly agree, 2 equals agree, 3 equals, and then end up with 5 equal, meaning strongly disagree, which means that the coefficients in your model will say the lower the number, the higher the agreement, which makes no sense. It's really more intuitive to code strongly agree is 5 and strongly disagree is 1, so that every 1 unit change in the response equals more support or less support, other than the inverse. Like when the number goes up, the agreement goes down. That's intellectually very difficult to manage when you have some variables that do mean up equals up and other ones that mean up equals down. And so again, that's like the data cleaning and preparation, thinking about what makes sense. And I understand from the purposes of a website design, it makes sense to just code responses as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is how they're given. But from a data user's perspective, having agreement equal negative numbers or going down just doesn't. So that's just me kind of like riffing a little bit and adding some original content to this, that it is in case that cleaning and preparing the data actually takes more work than running the models, in my experience.
Writes Hadley Wickham in the first sentence of the abstract for his widely read and cited 2014 paper called Tidy Data. Wickham is the author of the TIDAR package for the R statistical computing platform, which logs around 177,000 downloads per month. Articles in the popular press and business corroborate this need for tidiness. The Harvard Business Review calls the data scientist the sexiest job of the 21 stone century and talks about this new special form of
21st.
human. At ease in the digital realm, they are able to bring structure to large quantities of formless data and make analysis possible. Here, the intrepid analyst wrangles an orderly table from unstructured chaos. For the New York Times in 2014, the analyst's work is less sexy and equated to the low-wage maintenance labor of janitors. Whether or not you think data scientists are sexy, or whether you think janitors should be offended by this classist reference. There are some interesting assumptions and anxieties surfacing in both of these sets of received ideas. In one story, humans are able to tame the chaos of information overload visually. Visual organization helps us go from data to intelligence. In the second story, data are dirty, and it is actions of cleaning and tidying that put them back in their proper places.
Not that data are dirty, it's that data need to be, you have to think about how you want to interpret what the data mean, and then make sure the structures allow you to do that. You have multiple ways of coding data. There isn't a right way to do it. But anyway, okay. Also, while I'm here, why are we? What does this have to do with the last thing? What does data cleaning have to do with data visualizations? It's just another story. It's just another story on top of a story. And at this point, I've forgotten most of what the last story even, like, all the details of it. What was the main takeaway from that? I'm trying to remember. Maps that use sky blue on top of red aren't very easy to read. What was the main? It was like 3.5 pages of information. I don't remember I don't even know what the point of that last section was. I have no idea what I was meant to take away from that whole elaborate, figured, supported, extended riff on a specific, part of San Francisco in the early 2000s. It's gone out of my head already.
But what might be lost in the process? Or, more specifically, whose perspectives are lost in the process of dominating and disciplining data, and whose perspective Hives are imposed on the results. Both sets of received ideas make normative assumptions, namely that we all value cleanliness, efficiency and control over messiness, inefficiency and complexity. Scholars Katie Rawson and Trevor Munoz have advanced the idea that the cleaning paradigm assumes an underlying correct order and warn that cleaning can be a diversity hiding trick. In the perceived messiness of data, there is actually rich information about the circumstances under which it was collected.
Maybe. It kind of depends on the data. Messiness of the data, if you're doing survey data, probably not. That's pretty pre-structured. If you're doing open-ended questions to responses and you're reducing it down through coding, yeah, you're absolutely losing the variegated nature of the comments people made. So it kind of depends on the data. I don't know enough about other types of data. I would hope that medical data is pretty clean and also, captures a lot of the important variables. But I don't know, it seems like it kind of depends.
Yanni Lukasos concurs. Rather than talking about data sets, he advocates that we talk about data settings, both the technical and the human processes that affect what information is captured and how it is structured. Lucasus likes to quote the anthropologist Mary Douglas, who said famously, "What is dirt but matter out of place?" He employs the example of data in actual dirt, the soil of the Arnold Arboretum in Boston, Massachusetts. In order to determine the origin of a single cherry tree, he explains, you need to know to look at multiple database fields, including one that indicates who incorporated the plant into the collection, another that records the native country of the species, and a third that documents the way it came to the collection. The messiness of storing related data in 3 different fields is actually a signal that is meaningful information that points back to the complex history of record-keeping practices at the institution. Lucasus's assertion is that all data are local, by which he means they are connected, sometimes inextricably, to the human and technical conditions under which they are collected and maintained. For example, he tells the story of exploring data from the Clemson University Library in South Carolina while he was at a hackathon in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He stumbled across a puzzling record where the librarian had noted the place it described as upstate. Such a classification is relational to the place of collection. Upstate is a term immediately understandable to South Carolinians and refers to the westernmost region of the state, where Clemson is located. But it has no relevance to a person sitting at a hackathon in New England who might prefer a more generalized way of denoting the 10 or so counties that count as upstate.
Surely that's why you have data documentation that you provide. And then, well, actually what you ideally would do is have a definition that specifies the meaning of upstate and its geographical framework. But I don't know if you looked at the data documentation or if the data documentation existed. But I feel like we're getting so deep into the story that there's no larger picture to be seen here.
But note that even though the outsider may be frustrated with the fact that the record doesn't use latitude and longitude, there is meaningful and precise geographic information contained in the upstate reference. Not only that, but there is meaningful metadata provided by this cultural insider reference. Only somebody collecting the data in South Carolina would have referred to that region as upstate. So we can reason that the data was collected there. It is because of records like this that taming and cleaning data is such a chore. It is like chopping off the roots of a tree that connects it to the ground from which it grew. It is painstaking and cumbersome. Plus, uprooting a tree might not always make sense. We might relate the growth of tools to tidy, tame, and discipline data to the proliferation of street names and signs in the landscape. Geographer Reuben Rose Redwood describes how, for example, prior to the Revolutionary War, very 75. Few streets in Manhattan had signs posted at intersections. Street names, such as they existed, were vernacular and related to the particularity of a spot. For example, take a right at the Red House. With the increased mobility of people and things, think of the postal system, the railroads, the telegraph. Street names became systematized in the 19th century in the United States and institutionalized by the early 20th century. Rose Redwood calls this the production of legible urban spaces. There is high economic value to legible spaces, particularly for large international corporations to deliver boxes of anything and everything directly to our front door. The point here is that one does not need street names for navigation until one has strangers 3 in the landscape. Likewise, data does not need cleaning until there are strangers in the dataset. Who are those strangers in the dataset? People who work with data are alternately called unicorns, wizards, ninjas, rock stars, and janitors. These operators are strangers in datasets because they often sit at 1, 2, or many levels removed from the collection and maintenance process of the data that they work with.
What does this have to do with the data visualization? This is so rambling.
This is a negative externality of open data, APIs, and the vast stores of training data sets available online. The data appear available and ready to mobilize, but what they represent is not always well documented or easily understood by outsiders. This problem That data do a very poor job of speaking for themselves, especially when the listener is a stranger, is something we will return to at length in the next chapter.
I mean, if there's good data documentation, this shouldn't be an issue. That's why you have like variable reports and study reports and other supporting documents. You don't just hand someone a data set. You know, you give them the questionnaire, you give them all the information on the study, and you give them a report. And you also make yourself available as a researcher to answer some of these questions. But I don't understand what this chapter is about. I don't know how far into it we are. I still don't know what the point of this chapter is.
Unicorns, wizards, ninjas, rock stars, and janitors all have something in common. Apart from the unicorn, a mythical creature that is not usually depicted with a readily apparent gender, they are mostly stereotyped as male undertakings. For and unicorns, wizards, ninjas, rock stars, and janitors work alone. Their work is solitary and...
Do janitors work alone? Do rock stars work alone? Do ninjas even work alone? Sorry, like I'm going to hone in on a stupid point to, like, or an unimportant point to, wow, my audio is all over the place today. It's very annoying. I'm going to have to figure out how to fix that. But, yeah, like, I don't understand here why that assumption is made that they work alone, because I don't think that's inherent in any of them.
Singular. When applied to data science, the focus is on an individual's extraordinary technical expertise and ability to determine meaning where others cannot. Solo superheroes and informational geniuses that weave meaning from chaos. There is a genius in the world of eviction data. It is Matthew Desmond. 2Cs at Harvard is taught jointly by computer science and statistics. As of this writing, there are 37 male faculty and 17 female faculty. 3. This does not mean there are no data ethics courses, only that it is not the norm to address these concerns in...
Oh, sorry, I was working on my filter, so you can see that I'm softer now. I'll turn my volume up. Oh, that's way too soft. That's way too soft. All right, I'm gonna have to fix that. I didn't mean to get the boring... Oh, here we go. I'll just speak a little closer to the mic now. Data scientists are unicorns, wizards. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's get back here. I got distracted. There is a genius in the world of eviction data.
There is a genius in the world of eviction data. It is Matthew Desmond.
Pause.
Officially designated as such by the MacArthur Foundation for his work on poverty and eviction in the U.S. He is a professor and director of the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. In an article for Shelterforce, organizers from the AMP, the Workers' Center of Central New York, the Community Alliance of Tenants in Oregon, and the Housing Justice League in Atlanta detail how Desmond and the Eviction Lab were pursuing a big data agenda for acquiring national evictions data at the expense of understanding local context and providing adequate protections for the communities represented by the data. Initially, the Eviction Lab approached community organizations like AAMP to request their data. The AMP wanted to know more about privacy protections and how the Eviction Lab would keep the data from falling into landlord hands. Instead of continuing the conversation, Eviction Lab turned to a real estate data broker and purchased data of lower quality. The authors write, AMP and tenants together have found 3 times the amount of evictions in California as Desmond's Eviction Lab show. Unfortunately, due to the fact that Desmond is a genius, his social capital mean that the numbers that many policymakers see and use to make decisions are inaccurate. In this case, the priority was on speed, at the expense of establishing trusted relationships with actors on the ground, and national coverage, at the expense of accuracy. Note that speed and perceived comprehensiveness help to maintain and secure the status of the white male genius and his institution, while strategically downplaying the work of coalitions, communities, and movements that are led primarily by women and people of color. This is a classic case of big dick data, a phenomenon you can read more about in the next chapter of this book. We're unpacking America's eviction crisis, proclaims the Eviction Lab homepage. Find out how many evictions happen in your community, But what might be gained if we understood data work not as a genius-like wizardly undertaking, but rather one that embraced multiple voices and valued different types of expertise at all stages of the process?
Can I just say, all right, I'm going to have to turn, again, I'm going to have to turn this up. Really struggling with my audio. Okay, I think that should be about equal with what the thing was. Why did we even need that eviction stuff at the beginning if this was the point? Like the whole data visualization and good data visualization versus bad data visualization has literally nothing that I can see to do with this idea that data production needs to be a cooperative community process where a lot of voices, like what if we just started this chapter with this question? The idea that data collection, cleaning, preparation, and publication should be an inclusive intersectional process. Surely we all would have saved a lot of time and had a much clearer thesis of what this chapter is meant to be about. Because right now, I think we started on page 69. We're almost 10 pages into this chapter. And I finally got something that was like a clear thesis. That's way too long. That's just way too long to take. I know I have the same complaints over and over, but the book has the same problems over and over.
While the anti-eviction mapping project could have handed off the data it collects to a single map-making rock, star, unicorn, ninja, wizard, janitor, they made an intentional decision to include many designers in the process, including many non-experts who experienced the power of making maps for the first time.
Is that why we were set up? Was that why we were now? So now, like 10 pages in, we're finally the reason for having the anti-eviction mapping project is explained. Why couldn't you have just done this at the start of the chapter? In this chapter, we're going to look at two different ways of creating data and data visualizations. One that is community-based, intersectional, and tries to take on the voices of a lot of people, versus one that considers it like the purview of experts who are usually white male people in the profession who have their own perspective and location. Would that have been so difficult? Is that so hard to say? Really? Really?
The resultant proliferation of maps, oral histories, events, murals and reports reflects the diverse voices of many collaborators who are working together to document the scope and the scale of San Francisco's housing crisis. And this has the consequences of building the technical capacity of residents as well as relationships between community members. Slowly and surely, map by map, collaboration by collaboration. In fact, one of the explicit goals of AMP is to build solidarity and collectivity among the project's participants who could help one another in fighting evictions and collectively combat the alienation that eviction produces. 5. In addition to translating evictions into insights, the AMP wants to use the process of making maps to produce new human relationships. A key contribution of feminist thinking has been to recognize how a multiplicity of voices, rather than one single loud or magical or technical voice, often results in a more complete picture of the issue at hand.
That could have been the first chapter of this entire thing. That literally should have been the opening chapter of this, opening paragraph of this entire chapter. Because now I know where we're coming from. Now I know what the point of all of this last story after story, without any context, any linkage, any clear direction has been about. This, on page 78, after 10 pages. So frustrating.
Feminist philosophers like Donna Haraway are part of a postmodern wave of thinkers that maintain that all knowledge is partial, meaning no one person or group has the privilege of a distant, objective view of the truth. Even if they self-identify as a unicorn, janitor, ninja, wizard or rock star. But embracing pluralism, as this concept is sometimes described, does not mean that everything is relative, nor that all truth claims have equal weight, nor that feminists don't believe in science. It simply means that when people make knowledge, they do so from a particular standpoint, a situated, embodied location in the world. This is called standpoint theory in feminist thinking. And the easiest way to start to understand standpoint theory is to think of it like perspectives that you have from identities you are born into, as well as your experiences. For example, we, the CO authors of this book, speaking to you at this moment, are two white, cisgendered women, not Latino transmen. We live in Boston and Atlanta, not Bangalore or Sao Paulo. We've been trained as designers, software developers and scholars, and not as bank tellers or biomedical engineers. These perspectives matter. They will shape the questions that we ask of the world, the data we collect, the results that we see, and the meaning that we make. The idea behind standpoint theory is that pooling our standpoints makes for a richer and more robust objectivity. But there are forces beyond the individual operating in standpoint theory. Standpoints, writes sociologist Patricia Collins-Hill, are group-based experiences. Groups have a degree of permanence over time such that group realities transcend individual experiences. She gives the example of being African American, a stigmatized racial group in the US, while my individual experiences with institutionalized racism will be unique. The types of opportunities and constraints that I encounter on a daily basis will resemble those confronting African Americans as a group. Hill calls on us to use standpoint theory to acknowledge social inequality based on existing unequal power relations between social groups. Note how this is different than a call for simple diversity in individual perspectives, what people in the tech industry characterize as thought diversity. 6. This means explicitly acknowledging and taking steps to address the unjust structural forces at play in our work, including racism, sexism, and more. Indeed, beyond simply embracing different perspectives, feminist standpoint theory asserts that the best way to strengthen objectivity and address injustice in the system is to begin with the lives, experiences, and interpretations of the people most marginalized in a particular context. Applying this to computational systems design, Schauenbarzel calls for starting first and foremost with the perspective of the marginal user. From a gender perspective, that would mean beginning with female and non-binary perspectives. On a project that involves international development data, that might mean beginning not with institutional goals but with indigenous standpoints. For the AMP, that means centering the voices and experiences of those who have been evicted. Privileging marginal perspectives helps to expose aspects of the world that appear to be neutral and objective but are actually distorted and one-sided accounts of the world. And centering marginalized standpoints can generate new and critical questions that would otherwise go unasked because the system is set up to suppress those voices. As Kim Tallbear says, if we promiscuously account for standpoints, objectivity will be strengthened. So, how do we begin to embrace this kind of plurality of voices and perspectives in data science?
This is the first time in the chapter I've enjoyed what I'm hearing. I feel like now I have concepts that are being built on and points that are being made. I didn't need those other stories to hear that. I didn't need any of that to understand this. Maybe a little one-paragraph illustration, but honestly, you could have just lopped off the entire first part of this chapter until we hit, where is it? Until we started talking about standpoint theory. A key contribution of feminist thinking has been to recognize how a multiplicity of voices, rather than a single loud or magical technical voice, often results in a more complete picture of the issue at hand. Literally could have started the chapter there. It would have been so much more efficient and clear. Unbelievable.
The first step in activating the value of multiple perspectives is
These are
to
good
acknowledge
points.
the partiality of your own. But how? It can be particularly hard to see just how partial your own perspective is if you are a member of a dominant group whose way of operating in the world stands in for the default or normal way. Think back to the example of Maria McWhirter's catalogue search described in Bring Back the Bodies, in which white people were not labelled as such. Because being white in the United States is simply so normal that it goes without saying.
Scroll, scroll, scroll.
or labeling. Feminist sociologist Michael Kimmel illustrates this concept in the following way. While sitting in a small study group in graduate school, his African-American colleague said, "When I look in the mirror, I see a black woman. When a white woman looks in the mirror, she sees a woman," to which Kimmel rejoins, half joking and half serious, "And when I look in the mirror, I see a human being." Kimmel says that he sees a human being rather than a white man because throughout his life, his race and gender have granted him privileges. One of the most notable of these privileges is, paradoxically, to not need to see his race and gender as markers of difference. So, as Kimmel articulates it, privilege is invisible to those that have it. You know you're a member of the dominant group when your gender or race or religion or sexuality is invisible. The fact that you do not have to consider and negotiate it every day. As whiteness scholar Robin DiAngelo says, a significant aspect of white identity is to see oneself as an individual outside of or innocent of race, just human. This basic insight is one of the main reasons standpoint theory is so important. It helps us understand the power dynamics at play in knowledge production and unmask partial perspectives masquerading as universal truths. If the world's data science is created by mostly men, then can we consider it objective? No, it represents the standpoint of the dominant group. If machine vision programs are trained on majority pale faces, then can we consider them accurate?
No, they represent the standpoint of the dominant group.
What happened there? No, suddenly just dropped very low.
If 3% of the people that work on criminal justice algorithms in the US are African American 7, then can we consider that software fair and unbiased? No, criminal justice algorithms represent the standpoint of the dominant group. These are localized standpoints that, because of the accumulated power and privilege of the dominant group, pass as objective truths. These are large-scale structural inequities, which we address further in the power chapter. But we can take individual and institutional steps towards addressing them right here and right now by incorporating more and different standpoints into data-oriented work. How?
Can I just point out again how much better this is than the first half of the chapter? Like, just compare the rambling stories with tons of detailed information and no context as to why you were learning that information or why it was important or what was important or what you're supposed to take away from this versus this clear writing that has like clear concepts that are being linked, paragraph after paragraph being built on each other, properly illustrated. I just feel like there was a word count that needed to be met, and they wrote this part of it and they're like, oh man, this isn't long enough. So I'm going to go back and add like 5,000 words of story before we actually deal with the main concepts in order to meet the word count. I just don't understand.
For one, you can disclose your own project's methods rather than sweeping them under the proverbial rug. This is called self-disclosure. You may have even heard the phrase coined by David Weinberger, transparency is the new objectivity. So rather than attempting to create visualizations and data science products that purport to be objective, you might build a space for transparency and self-disclosure into your design. People in journalism and science have been doing this for some time, at least as it relates to the technical methods employed in their analysis process. For example, Bloomberg's interactive visualization, What's Really Warming the World, walks the reader through common climate denier arguments that try to explain away the warming planet with reasons that...
Scroll, scroll, scroll. Oh, okay, picture.
Don't have to do with human activity. Is it volcanoes? Is it deforestation? Is it ozone pollution? The piece systematically demonstrates that these factors have little to do with global warming, whereas greenhouse gas emissions from human industries are the clear factor in rising global temperatures. One of the most interesting things about the piece is that it devotes almost a third of its real estate to describing the data it draws from and the methods the authors used for analysis. Providing access to the data, as well as describing the methods used to analyze, it is increasingly a convention in data journalism and aligned with the growing trend towards openness and reproducibility in scientific research. While these methodological accounts are presently focused on technical details, where is the data from? What program was used to analyze it? What statistical models were developed? There is a seed of possibility for revealing other details about the human process of making decisions about data storytelling. Who was on the team? Which hypotheses were pursued but ultimately proved false? What were points of tension and disagreement? When did data need some ground truthing by talking to data owners or domain experts? There is a story for how every evidence-based case came into being, and it is a story that involves money, institutions, humans and tools. Revealing this story through reflection and self-disclosure can be a feminist act.
I don't necessarily disagree with this. All right. However, the biggest restraint on this is word count, time, and resources. I can tell you, as someone who prepares data on a regular basis for the qualitative election study of Britain, we could have a whole documentation of questions that we thought about including but didn't in this round. But the fact is we have to get the data out, and we have to get our documentation out, and we have to get papers written. If we had infinite time and infinite resources, yeah, that's great. But a big challenge of this oftentimes is, how many words you actually have to spend on something and how much time you have to do it. Is it really interesting to know what there might be, if you have a null hypothesis, if you have a finding that you predicted and you didn't find it, that's reportable. That's not like a side issue. But some of these issues, some of these things to document are so small, and what were the points of tension and disagreement? Why would I want to have a publication that included the different points of view on certain questions that we included? It just is so much to document when you have so much to do. I'm not saying that this isn't worth doing. I do think some reflectivity is important. And I think if you have a specific goal to do a kind of data collection, but I think, like I said, a lot of us are just working with constraints of resources and on time. And so that makes it very, very difficult to do these idealized versions of data preparation or data publication. So I'm not, let's see. Human process of making decision about data storytelling, who was on the team, we do say that. Which hypotheses we would say that. What were the points of tension and disagreement? I don't feel comfortable revealing that about my team. When did the data need some ground truthing by talking to data owners or domain experts? I think you should do that in the data planning. That should be part of your methodology. So, I'm speaking within a specific discipline, in a specific world, and obviously I am quite open to the idea of qualitative research and being intersectional. The whole point of my qualitative research agenda is to get real people's perspectives without the filter of a survey questionnaire and a structured response options, But also I think we have to be realistic about what researchers have time and resources to do.
But data doesn't lend itself naturally to self-disclosure. Dietmar Offenhuber, head of the Information Visualization Program at Northeastern University, has advanced the idea that data appears so neutral because it is unclear who is the author.
Sometimes, we know who's on these, I'm speaking my perspective from the social sciences. We have lists of people who run the studies. We know the gender distributions. We know you can look up their pictures to see the background of it and their perspectives. So it is not always unclear who is the author. Just going to take that on board. I guess if you have Pew Research, they just sometimes, when you cite them, they just say a proper citation is Pew Research, and you don't cite the actual authors. There's a recent study I was looking at, making a video about, that looks at people who are child-free. And, there were 3 authors listed as writing the report, but when they went to do the citation, it was just supposed to be Pew Research, not the individual authors. So in that case, I think that's a valid point, but it's not always the case, just to say.
In written text, there is always an author, a tone, and a connection back to a human speaker through language and attribution. But, as we described on rational, scientific, objective viewpoints from mythical, imaginary, impossible standpoints, data and its visualizations carry tremendous rhetorical power, particularly for newcomers. Databases and charts are often so sophisticated at obscuring the perspectives of their human speakers. How can we connect spreadsheets back to speakers and visuals back to voices?
That's a valid question.
Self-disclosure could be as simple as being explicit, transparent, and possibly even visualizing who is doing the counting and mapping behind the scenes. Take the example of the aerial mapping image in the photo below. The Public Laboratory for Open Technology and Science is a citizen science group that got its start during the BP oil spill in 2010. They make high-resolution aerial maps by flying balloons and kites, which dangle cheap digital cameras over the environmental sites they seek to study. While the technique is low cost, the imagery produced is often higher resolution than existing satellite imagery because of the proximity to the ground. As you can see in the image, the mappers themselves are often visible in the final product, in the form of little bodies, gathered in boats or standing in clumps on a shoreline, looking up at the camera above them. The balloon string leads the eye back to their forms. Here, the bodies are not missing but represented in the final product. Literally.
I don't know. I don't know that this adds quality. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think it makes the information any more valid that you have little boats in here. I don't know. I'm not particularly convinced by this example myself.
Self-disclosure illustrates the feminist method of reflexivity, rigorous interrogation, and transparency about one's own position in the world.
I agree. Self-disclosure does do that, but including yourself in pictures, I don't think does. I just don't think that was a good example.
Not just one's technical methods, but one's social position, one's institutional position, one's racial position. Reflexivity is a meticulous tactic for addressing that aforementioned conundrum that privilege is blind to those who have it.
I also want to say, because I think what's something that's missing here is that reflexivity when person is a member of a minority group is also valuable. A lot of this is directed as criticism toward the dominant group and groups or intersections of dominant groups, which I get. But, you know, we had something with our study that we had to confront, realizing that we were slightly underprepared because we had a participant in our focus groups that we've had before in the past, but he's drifted increasingly far right. And so we have a desire to have people back year on year, and his views have changed over the course of 3 elections where we've had him involved. And this time, the focus group was actually led by our member she's Indian descent, British citizen, and she's got 2 kids who are obviously also of Indian descent and British citizens. And over the course of the group, he said some really offensive things. And I think in the moment, she was more focused on getting through the group, being professional, staying professional, also how the other participants might react to that and how to control the situation. And as a consequence of dealing with the momentary crisis, let's call it, she kind of pushed aside her feelings and her reactions. But after the group had ended, because she was very focused on being professional and getting through this and getting the data, and she was very polite, and, even though he said what I considered to be pretty terrible things, not to her directly, but about people who looked like her. He wasn't racist toward her. He was being racist in general. And afterwards, it was really upsetting for her. It really took a lot out of her emotionally, and we had a discussion as a group. Because again, it wasn't something we were expecting. It was something that came up on someone who was a long-term participant. And had we known that, we would not have put her in the situation of being the moderator, but we hadn't. We didn't know that. And so we had a discussion about her mental health and her emotional health and the toll that took on her. That it would not have taken on me because I'm white, or the principal, the study lead, because he's also white. And that reflexivity of having that kind of context for that interaction, and then researcher safety, is also a form of reflexivity that can be included. So, I think that also, this is, again, looking at it one-sided, but I just wanted to put a situation where reflexively, in the transcript, I don't know. Should we? Well, from her name, it's kind of obvious that she's got she's got an Indian name, and of course she deals with it in the course of the transcript. But it just seems to me that reflexivity isn't just something that dominant group members need to do to account for their perspectives or for what's going on in the data. So just wanted to give that little personal story. I want to check and see how much longer we have, because I'm about ready. I'm almost done with this chapter, if I'm honest. This is a long chapter, and there's a lot of information. Oh my God. Oh my God, it's still going. How long have we been going now? An hour. I know I paused a little bit. Oh, it's so long. Ugh. I might need to take a comfort break because I've been so... I think at the 1 hour mark, I get to take a break. I think that's fair. So let's pop back up here.
Embracing the value of multiple perspectives shouldn't stop with transparency and self-disclosure. It also means actively and deliberately inviting other standpoints, specifically those most marginalized by current power relations, into the analysis and storytelling process. As we have seen, the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project does this through producing maps with, not for, low-income residents and community organizations like the Eviction Defense Collective and Tenants Together. And there are projects that embrace pluralism and privilege marginal standpoints that we can look to as models. They come from diverse sectors such as university research labs, private consulting groups, and government.
And with that, I want to take a break. Been going for an hour and change. Yeah, just about an hour. And I need a little walk away. So I'm gonna put it back on some jazz music and take 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, even less than 5 minutes, as long as it takes for me to stretch my legs and refresh my coffee, because this is stone cold right now. So as you go ahead and feel free to take a break as well, or if you're watching this in the future, go ahead and fast forward. There's no point in you listening to jazz music unless you really like jazz music, in which case, enjoy. Okay, kittens, I'm back. I need to speed this up. I realize I want to apologize in advance for anyone who is a non-native speaker who might find this a little quick. I would just point to the fact that the words are on the screen. And so we are going to start to move because this is just ridiculously long. It's just taking too much time. I can only have a few hours to do this, and I was really hoping to get through more than just one chapter. And if it's gone an hour already, I know I've said a couple things. I don't think I said that much to drag it out. All right, get ready for Speedy.
Since 2012, Rahul and Emily Bhargava have worked with community organizations from Belo Horizonte to Boston to create data murals. These are large-scale infographics designed to be displayed in public spaces that tell data-driven stories about the people who occupy those spaces. For example, Groundwork Somerville, an urban agriculture non-profit, approached the Bhargavas in 2013. Emily recalls that the organization was in the process of establishing its first urban farm. The site was disorderly. It was behind a used car parts building and hidden between other semi-industrial lots. They had built raised beds and planted for one growing season, but passers-by were stealing the vegetables. The organization was also running a high school employment program called the Green Team, but struggling to fully involve the youth in their mission to create healthier communities. The Bhargavas and the director of Groundwork Somerville collected demographic data from the city, GIS data on unused lots, and internal data such as growing records, food donations, and attendance logs at community events. They worked with the youth over several after-school sessions to review and discuss the data as well as engage in story finding. By the end of these sessions, the youth had sketched the overall outline and iconography of the resulting mural. Read left to right, the mural frames the problem. A man grasps for a basket of veggies, but it says, "Healthy food is hard to get." They back that claim up with numbers depicting the cost of healthy food and the number of people with prediabetes. It then transitions into showing opportunity, the number of unused lots in the city and how much land has been reclaimed for urban farming. Finally, the mural shows how the Groundwork Somerville truck brings many pounds of affordable produce to low-income neighbourhoods and employs over 400 youth residents. It ends with a vision of a unified and healthy community. Youth, staff and volunteers work together over the course of several weeks to paint the 20-metre-long mural on the corrugated steel wall of the garden.
Okay, do we have a picture? Okay, yeah, that's very nice. That's very nice. I don't know what it has to do with standpoint theory, but it's a nice thing to do. So, cool.
On July 30th, 2013, the mayor and other community leaders attended the ribbon cutting to officially launch the renovated garden. Emily describes the visit. The youth, having just spent weeks looking at the data, painting the mural together, and building relationships with staff and volunteers, were able to talk about the story in great detail to their elected officials. Data murals, like the one in Somerville, are becoming a more common practice. Communities from Detroit, 8 to Dar es Salaam have undertaken data murals to tell a public story about an important issue. In Dar es Salaam, the Data Zaitu project ran a listening campaign in 4 low-income districts. They compiled the residents' concerns, as well as statistical data, into a data mural about teenage pregnancy and sexual health. In the image, a young woman is pregnant and wants to grow up and be a doctor. Her peers tell her that she can still dream big, but that she should seek counselling at the youth health clinic to do the best by her new family. And murals are just one kind of output from a pluralistic, community-centred data process. There are many examples of participatory mapping that combine data collection and community storytelling. For example, in the project Map Kibera, the Ground Truth Initiative worked with residents to map the largest and most well-known slum in Nairobi. While Kibera was not unmapped prior to 2009, when the project began, 9 the maps that were made were used by the government, NGOs and researchers to drive policy, but not made available to residents. Do you remember the example of the teenager who Target identified as pregnant before her parents did? The issue in that case, as is true of many instances of corporate and government-sponsored data collection efforts, is that the people who collect, store, and derive insight from the data often wield outsized power over those about whom the data are collected. Embracing pluralism is a way to rectify this power imbalance. Map Kibera seeks to redress that asymmetry by teaching residents to collect their own data, make their own maps and tell their own stories through community radio and video journalism. Likewise, the Digital Democracy Project works with indigenous groups around the world to defend their rights through collecting data and making maps. In the process, they have developed SMS services with domestic violence groups in Haiti and
Scroll, scroll, scroll.
Helped the Wapichana people in Guyana make a data-driven case for land rights to the government. Neither Bella Batiunga from the Data Zetu project, nor Erica Hagen and Mikel Maron from the MAP Kibera project, nor Emily Jacobi from Digital Democracy, nor the Bhargavas envision themselves as unicorns, or janitors, or ninjas, or wizards, or rock stars. At Digital Democracy, we try to fight the superhero narrative, says Jacobi. We are sidekicks rather than superheroes. Through a series of workshops and trainings, these groups enhance the capacity of an entire community to engage in data analysis and storytelling. Emily Bhargava reflects, painting a mural is great for building community relationships. But the time when people actually become empowered is during the story-finding process, when they learn to translate the data and own its meaning. And doing that collectively helps to even the power differential.
I don't disagree with any of this. Honestly, I feel like this, if I hadn't been so overwhelmed by the first half of the chapter, I wouldn't be so emotionally and mentally exhausted. Because this is much better than the first, which was just multiple long stories without context. So again, I just feel like this chapter could have been half as long and twice as effective.
The facilitators in these cases act more like cheerleaders or guides or advocates or even therapists. Perhaps appropriately, the Bhargavas' website is located at datatherapy.org, facilitating data-informed community conversations, mapping forests in Guyana and painting data murals may seem foreign for those who are accustomed to being indoors with their data. But the ideas about participatory meaning-making are transferable to more conventional contexts like municipal government. In 2015, the city of Boston was in the process of developing its first master plan in 50 years. A master plan is a document that guides future growth and development across a range of city systems like transportation, the built environment and social services and settings. The transportation wing of this effort was called Go Boston 2030, and, with the help of a grant from the Barr Foundation, they assembled a team that attempted to do something highly inventive in community engagement and participatory data analysis. The way that transportation master plans typically work is that the city planners set up a framework, as well as metrics for success. They then hire external consultants to help undertake a visioning process, involve various stakeholders and members of the public, collect data, analyze and synthesize that data, and produce a report. The City of Boston did all of these steps, which resulted in the Go Boston 2030 Vision and Action Plan in 2017, but they also did something different along the way. In addition to holding community input meetings, the city dispatched colourful food trucks and decked-out idea bikes with trailers to all of the neighbourhoods in the city. These mobile units served hot chocolate, and staff offered post-it notes and friendly conversation about commuting in Boston now and in the future. Their goal was to collect data in the form of residents' questions and ideas about the future of transportation in Boston. And collect they did. Over a period of 8 months, the city collaborated with a non-profit Interaction Institute for Social Change to collect 8,700 questions and ideas, public engagement data at an unprecedented scale in relation to prior efforts. So here is the critical juncture point in the story. What did they do with the
Scroll, scroll, scroll.
data? At this stage in the process, the typical thing to do would be to fork over the citizen ideas to a data wizard ninja employed by the transportation consultants and await the answers. Instead, Go Boston 2030 decided to use the data analysis process as an opportunity for participatory meaning-making and consensus building amongst a multitude of stakeholders. They organized a large meeting of policymakers, public servants and community leaders, in which the participants organized into thematic groups, reviewed each of the ideas that had been collected, making note of the ideas that warranted further discussion. One idea in Catherine's group provoked controversy: more housing density around transit. A state transportation official kicked off the conversation by making an impassioned case for changing the city's zoning codes. Then a city planner offered a short history lesson on the dangers of prioritizing high-density housing. The non-profit representatives followed up by advocating for a requirement for affordable housing should any zoning codes be changed. While not everyone agreed on the details, the group did agree to add that idea to a list of priority recommendations for the city to pursue.
Yeah, fair enough. You know, like it should be, I mean, I don't know that the data cleaning necessarily, like, you still have to clean up the data a little bit to make it presentable. But in terms of who gets to decide what data goes forward, yeah, it makes sense for it to be participatory and for there to be wider debates than just one person sitting in a room deciding what goes in and what goes out, which isn't normally what happens. I mean, if you have study people at the top, it is more participatory, but it can be considered, and rightly so, critiqued as an elite thing rather than involving the community. And I think that there's a lot of good points in here, honestly. Like, I don't have a problem necessarily with the content of this chapter, just the way that it's presented.
www.flickr.com/photos/N. In early 2016, Go Boston 2030 invited 75 community stakeholders into a participatory data analysis process. This is actually one of the idea roundtables, but placeholder until we get an image from the idea review session. The event was instructive in that the process of data analysis was not imagined as a purely technical problem, something to be handled by a natural language processing expert or a statistician. The designers of this process, the consulting firm Interaction Institute for Social Change, understood that the choice to prioritize one idea over another would carry real weight and material consequences for the people of Boston, consequences that a natural language processing expert or a statistician could not understand simply by looking at word frequencies in the data. Determining which ideas to prioritize among the thousands that were collected could only be achieved by bringing many forms of expertise to an actual table. The Go Boston 2030 process, the Bargavas' data murals, and the anti-eviction mapping project are examples of the feminist values in action.
Again, why is this chapter so good in the second half? Why is it so good in the second half? All of this is good, but I was so bored to get here. It's too bad. It's really too bad.
Note how they represent different institutional starting points. The first was a government endeavour, the second is a small private consulting group, and the third is a fluid grassroots collective. All embrace pluralism, value knowledge from distinct standpoints, disclose their own standpoint, and centre the perspectives of marginalised groups. While we do not necessarily need a 75-person community meeting to compute average daily temperatures from instrument readings, we may want to consider that meeting the second we try to make meaning from those readings, defining questions to ask the data, interpreting the data, or thinking about how to allocate resources across a vast geography based on the data. Which is to say that as soon as data start to become information that can be operationalized for decision-making, they leave the technical domain and cannot be black-boxed into the server closets of even the most crackerjack unicorn rock stars. A data scientist is not going to save democracy, but a well-designed, data-driven, participatory process that centers the standpoints of those most marginalized, empowers participants and builds new relationships across lines of social difference. Well, that might just have a chance.
Please be the end of the chapter. Oh, yes. All right. High five, everyone. We made it. Yeah, I just want to lob off the first section of that chapter. There's so much in there that was so good. I think that the points, really the chapter should have not been like about data wizards and all that kind of stuff. It really should have, in my opinion, started out with the idea that standpoint theory and incorporating feminist practices like standpoint theory into our data collection, cleaning, and analysis can profoundly transform the way that data connect to people and can connect to communities. And using this, just the Boston thing, as a case study, I think you could have done everything you needed to theoretically. So the way that I would have liked to have seen this chapter, like if you'd given this to me as editing, I would have been like, in this chapter, we're going to discuss a case study in which feminist standpoint theory added so much value and included, and actually was a way of, rather than informing people, bringing people together. And then just start with that whole standpoint theory thing. And you can then contrast that against the idea of the unicorn data cleaner. Maybe mention that one, like the idea of the one guy who went on his credibility, and because of his reputation within a group, he was given this work and he produced a data set, but the data set was found to be highly flawed. and then compared that to participatory data collection, cleaning, meaning making, and synthesis. And it would have been great. It would have been very interesting. It would have been theoretically grounded. It would have been informative. It showed the practicality. It showed a case study of how this can be done. And this isn't suitable for all types of data analysis. I do think that there are downsides to this that aren't discussed. Right? So let's have a little realism here, because I think it's fair. We're doing a critique of this. All right, let me just say, when we do the crap sandwich, I love what Boston did. I absolutely love it. I think that is absolutely the right way to make public policy. Absolutely. And when you're talking about making decisions that impact on people's lives, then the people whose lives are impacted, especially the people who don't normally get a chance to be heard, bringing those people in so that they are heard is a way to rectify that problem. And also to see needs that aren't being articulated based on a small subset of the usual suspects who get consulted. So much I love about this. The practical downsides of this is the budget. This process, and a city of Boston obviously has a reason to invest money in order to have this plan be inclusive. So they're willing to spend the money on this. Convincing funders, like, scientific bodies, that is an entirely different challenge. It didn't say whether or not these people were compensated for their time. And I know it's a dumb thing, but one of the problems with doing, our study that we come across every single time is, how do we compensate our participants for their time? Because if you pay people for participating, there are then tax implications, right? So then you've got a whole barrier of, okay, like, how do we make sure that we can compensate them fairly, but we also don't give them income that they have to declare? Because that's another problem that you're landing on them, right? So, universities do deal with this, especially in psychology departments, where they have to provide incentives to students to participate. And a lot of times they're things like, Amazon vouchers or whatever else. But that, you can't just expect people to work for free. You can't just expect them to give you, just give me, your contribution to this project in and of itself will be so rewarding that you'll just donate your time. No. You've got to pay people for your time these days. You want high quality and participation. People got to walk away with 25, 30, 40, 50 bucks in their pocket because they could have been doing something else that day, right? You're asking them for their expertise. You can't do that for free. So that increases the budget. It's just a realistic thing, right? That also has a higher requirement for confidentiality, data protection, all those kinds of things. Like, do you have to do pseudonymous, do you have to give everyone who participates an alias so that they aren't identifiable? Right, and their data isn't disclosive in terms of where they live. You've got data protection concerns that comes with this kind of work, at least in this, the Boston thing. If they're using their real names and they're talking about their neighborhoods and their streets, that's all disclosive. You got to then go through the transcripts and cover that up, or give them an alias, which adds an extra burden of work. And the other thing is that when a lot of times, I appreciate this because it does challenge a lot of norms. But generally, if I were to go to a funding body asking for research money to do this kind of work, and someone comes along and wants to do a traditional social science survey into crime or perceptions of crime, and they're replicating stuff, and it's going to meet another long-term running series that has similar questions, so we're going to enhance this data set, maybe with a new generation, new data, new cohorts, new communities, or whatever else. And it's designed to be for social scientists who are the people on the panels deciding the funding. There's a lot of navel gazing. And so breaking through this is also in itself is a challenge. It's easier to do funding applications because, academics are under so much pressure to get money that in some ways that absolutely shapes the kinds of bids that they produce. They shape their bids to kind of think about what the funding body wants to fund. And this is expensive. This is really expensive to do in terms of recruitment, retention, payments, payment structures, all that kind of stuff. So while I totally appreciate the sentiment, and I was honestly informed, and I learned something about the way that participatory Data collection can incorporate standpoint theory in action, not just in theory, but actually as a practice. And the payoffs for that, the value added, that's convinced me. I don't have a problem with the method. What I see, though, are the challenges to doing that kind of research in the current research environment. And some data are better suited for this kind of work, I think, than others, or at least public policy outcome data, community-based data collection and processing, things that have a direct, like you're getting information so you can directly feed back into the community, are all really, really suitable for standpoint theory, participatory data collection and analysis. I don't need to be convinced of that. What I see, though, as the problem is institutional biases against this kind of stuff from the people who fund the research, and also a realistic discussion in this book or in this chapter about the added cost and extra work that it takes. I'm not saying that that's a reason to not do it, but I think you should be honest with people about how much more money you need, how much more time you need, and and how many more resources you have to put into it. All right. Chapter 4 is done. Chapter 4 is done. So as we are speaking now, I'm going to go ahead and I noticed that during the course of this, can I set up a live stream on my live stream? Let's find out if I can do that. I was getting hungry. So I was planning on trying to go a little bit longer because I got up 7 this morning to sort of prep for this. And as a consequence, I'm getting a little bit, I want a bit of nosh. And so what I will, oh good, yeah, someone is talking about, I'll just move this over here. Someone is talking about how Elon's trans daughter is, oh, you can't see it in this current thing, it's basically telling the truth on him. And I was so glad to see that. Just as an aside, what Elon Musk did to his daughter by complaining about her to Jordan Peterson was obnoxious and terrible and absolutely out of order, completely out of order. I don't know why. He's a terrible parent. Your parents are supposed to love their kids, not publicly humiliate them and disown them. And then the way he uses he uses the phrase dead naming as like a joke. But because Stephen King referred to X's Twitter, he goes, "Oh, dead name." Like, you are literally belittling your own child when you do that every single time you do it. What a terrible person he is. What an absolutely terrible person. All right, so no, I can totally. All right, here we go. I can totally reuse these settings. Oh, wrong one. Wrong one. Schedule stream. What do you think? Like, I think I could probably do a half an hour. Time to have some lunch, relax. I don't want to make it too long because I don't want to, what's this word phrase I'm thinking about? Like, I don't want to drink this out all day. I have other things to do. I was kind of hoping to get through 4 chapters, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it might be 3 in a marathon. Maybe if I make the voice a bit faster. The numbers don't speak for themselves. All right, Data's chapter 5. Oh, here we go. Why didn't I just do chapter? Chapter 5. The numbers speak for themselves. The numbers speak for themselves. So, yeah, I'm thinking that should be good. 30 minutes from now. And then we'll get going. And I think, what episode are we on? I know I already did the artwork for this, so I can check the episode number. Change to OBS files, patriarchy, 27? Nope, not 27. This is 27. 28, apparently. Apparently it's episode 28. That's the one. Episode 28. Change this. Just make this the default because I'm boring and I'm lazy. And we're going to set this yada, 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 yada. Monetization, customization, visibility. I think that's it. Yeah, ads. I'm sorry. No, not manually. Okay. I just do it at a frequency. I think I do it at the most expansive. Oh, every 30 minutes is an option now. Okay. That way you only have to see 2. And customization. No, don't need any of that. And we're going to do this at 12:15. 45 minutes? No, we'll do it at 12 o'clock. I'll deal with it. I might have to eat on screen. Okay. So now you have your next live stream set up. Sorry if I didn't, I wanted to say hi. I saw that Scribby's in the chat. Thank you for sticking. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'll just deal with this. Okay, that seems good. I will finish this off and then set the other one and get it all going. So 30 minutes, I might have to redo it, but I will see you in 27 minutes. I'm being very German about this. All right, you all. Thanks, kittens. Have a great day, wherever it is, whatever it is you are, and I will see you again very soon. And keeping